to the last day of democracy days. Okay, so just a really brief lesson. I don't think anybody have American government? You had American history, would probably cover it. Okay. The Ninth Amendment, the Bill of Rights. What are the Bill of Rights? What are they? What are some freedoms we have in the Bill of Rights? Freedom of speech. The government shall not infringe your speech. Shall pass no law. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the freedom of speech or blah blah blah. Okay. What else? Freedom of press. Your right to due process. Your right to have an attorney. All those things. Well, most of the Bill of Rights are very specific. Here's what you can. The government can't do this, can't do this, can't do this, can't do this. But the Ninth Amendment's really interesting. The Ninth Amendment states that the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So, what does that mean? The enumeration of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage. What is enumeration? What does enumeration sound like? First Amendment, Second Amendment, enumeration. Numbers. So numbering, just because we numbered and listed a bunch of rights, does not mean what? Shall not be construed to, shall not be interpreted to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So what do you think that means? Yeah.
It means that you can't use those rights and those freedoms to deny people other rights they don't have.
Exactly. Just because we listed you have a right to free speech, you have a right to free press, you have a right to have a gun, you have a right to have a lawyer, just because we listed all those rights doesn't mean there aren't other rights out there. Does that make sense? So that's what the Ninth Amendment is kind of like a catch-all phrase. Yeah, we listed a bunch of stuff, but there's no way we can list every right. So in addition to all these written rights, we have others there that are not listed. So, in 1965, Estelle Griswold, if I can pronounce her name right, was the director of Planned Parenthood in Connecticut. And she committed a crime. What crime did she commit? Yeah.
Provided birth control.
She provided birth control to married couples. And at the time, in 1965, in Connecticut, birth control was a crime. And she flat out said, yes, I indeed did provide married couples birth control. She admitted, I committed a crime. So what happened? She was convicted, went all the way up to the Supreme Court. What did the Supreme Court say? Whatever that screen thing is called, the screen. What did the Supreme Court rule in 1965? Is that a hand or is that just a...
I'm just trying to see.
Trying to see, okay. Yeah, I'm blind back there too, I need to see. Yes?
They ruled that you have a right to privacy. Like, they ruled in her favor that she won.
The Supreme Court ruled that what married people do in their own bedrooms is their own damn business. Okay, that's their own business. You know, you can't, there's a zone of privacy. There's a zone of privacy. Based on the Third, Fourth, Fifth Amendment, all these amendments hint at a right to privacy. And using the Ninth Amendment, it said, yeah, the Ninth Amendment is very clear. We didn't list every right, and clearly the framers, if you look at the Third, the Fourth, the Fifth Amendment, you look at all the Bill of Rights, and clearly there's an intent there that the government should leave you alone in your own bedroom. And so, in this ruling, the Supreme Court created a brand spanking new right called the right to privacy. Never been a right to privacy before in the Constitution. Now we have it. Okay. So again, Ninth Amendment, we have rights not listed in the Bill of Rights. And that's what the Ninth Amendment says. Now, fast forward 8 years later. This one you might know. You probably don't know Griswold v. Connecticut. And I give you Griswold v. Connecticut because for a very good reason, because we're going to talk about that in a minute. But this one you probably know, Roe v. Wade. In 1973, the right to privacy was expanded. Okay. Again, originally, in fact, I think I saw Professor Moser in here somewhere. I thought I saw him. Oh, there you are in the back. Okay. Yeah. So, you showed the movie The Janes on Monday or Tuesday? Monday, which is about the pre-Roe, how women dealt with the abortion before Roe v. Wade, when it was illegal in many states. And in Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court ruled that the right to privacy established in Griswold v. Connecticut is expanded and now covers other things, such as abortion. Now, by the way, the original right to privacy was gradually expanded. Originally only applied to married couples, and then applied to non-married couples too. But now it applied to abortion in Roe v. Wade. And in 2003, 21 years ago, okay, is anyone older than 21? Okay, so, right. So in your lifetime, 21 years ago, it was illegal in many states to have gay sex. Homosexual sex was a crime in many states, including Texas. And in this case, in Lawrence versus Texas, the Supreme Court ruled for the first time that, again, what gay people do in the privacy of their own homes is private. The government shall not interfere with that. And so expanded the right to privacy once again to include homosexual sex. So, again, only 21 years ago, homosexual sex became a guaranteed right. It was a crime in many parts of the states again, not that long ago. I mean, we often think about, oh, that's all different. No, this is 21 years ago. This is how recent this stuff is. Now, I have stuff in yellow here. Why do I have stuff in yellow? Well, because a couple of years ago, oh, that's right, the video's not going to work. A couple of years ago, the Supreme Court, so what, this not quite the correct quote, but what the Supreme Court giveth, the Supreme Court can taketh away. And so in Supreme Court, in Griswold v. Connecticut, in Roe v. Wade, in Lawrence v. Texas, the Supreme Court began to take away in the Dobbs decision. And let's see. Oops, I meant to do this, not what I meant to do. Where? So, sorry. That's what we were trying to struggle to work on earlier, was get the volume to work. So for 50 years, we had the right to an abortion, and in the Dobbs decision, the Supreme Court ruled that there is no longer a right to abortion. And what was, in my opinion, again, my opinion doesn't count. I'm just a faculty member at St. Charles Community College. I just teach politics here, so what do I know, right? But in my opinion, it was a horrific decision because it gave no protections to women whatsoever. It ruled that the states can do pretty much what it can, outright ban abortions without other protections. Now, let me back up a little bit. The Roe decision was originally pretty complicated. Roe v. Wade originally said that there were trimesters, that the first trimester, the first 3 months of a pregnancy, women could pretty much do what they wanted to do with their bodies, for basically 12 plus weeks. The second trimester, states could regulate but not prohibit abortions. And in the third trimester, states could actually outright ban abortions with one exception. What is the one exception in Roe? And actually, again, there were a whole bunch of other cases that kind of tweaked Roe. So eventually it became not trimesters, but before viability and after viability. So viability, anyone know, any bio majors? Anyone know when viability is for a pregnancy typically? 25 weeks. Okay, so yeah, mid-20 weeks, 25 weeks or so. So basically what Roe had, after Roe and a series of other rulings, it said the first half the pregnancy, women could have an abortion. The second half, they could not. But states could ban it. However, there was a caveat in all these Roe decisions, all these pro right to privacy decisions, and that when could women still have an abortion even later in pregnancy, even at month 6 or 7? Yes.
In cases of rape or incest?
No, that's a good guess though. Yeah. If the mother's health or life was in danger. So, and they had both a health and life exception. And so sometimes a pregnancy goes bad, late in pregnancy. Doesn't happen. Typically by months 5 or 6 or 7, women and parents are very excited about the baby. They start decorating the room, they painted the room. But sometimes something goes bad, there's a fetal abnormality, the fetus actually dies in the womb, and you have to have an abortion to protect the mother's health. Sometimes it's to protect the mother's health. There have been cases where women have had abortions. Again, these are women who want babies, okay, have abortions later in pregnancy because the fetus is not viable, and the doctors have told them, if you don't have an abortion, you could damage your uterus and never have children. So again, I know it seems weird. Why would you have an abortion if you want kids? Because they want kids. If they don't have an abortion, it would actually, if they had to deliver the baby, it could actually prevent them from having more children. So that's the reason why. Generally speaking, late-term abortions are because women who have wanted abortions, who wanted children, have been told that there's a problem. I actually have a friend of mine whose second child had a severe abnormality and was born, I forgot exactly what the enzymes they were, whatever, but couldn't actually process food. And so once it was born, it was slowly starving to death. And their second child died in their arms in the hospital like at 3 or 4 days old. They just watched him slowly starve to death in the hospital. And unfortunately, you can't get a test for that until around month 6, because the fetus is not developed enough. And so their third child, they tested. Luckily, it was fine. But if it had had that abnormality, they probably would have had an abortion earlier. And it's month 6, just so they wouldn't have to go through, watch their baby. Their third child died in their arms, like their second child did, in pain. So, that there is the exceptions here in Roe v. Wade for late-term abortions were health or life of the mother. The Dobbs decision threw all that out. No exceptions. States could do whatever they wanted. So it was a 6-3 decision. Donald Trump, I don't know if you could hear that very well, he said he was very proud of that. He appointed the 3 judges that made it 6 Republicans and 3 Democrats. And that's helped overturn Roe v. Wade. I wish I could turn the volume on this thing.
early cutoff can now potentially be investigated as a crime, which in turn means search histories, browsing histories, text messages, location data, payment data, information from period tracking apps. Prosecutors can examine all of that if they believe the loss of a pregnancy may have been deliberate. Clarence Thomas, in his concurrence, indicated he'd actually like to go a little further.
He writes, quote, "In future cases, we should reconsider all of this court's substantive due process precedents, including Griswold, Lawrence, and Obergefell." He's talking about reconsidering decisions on gay rights and the right to contraception.
A historic decision about abortion. In the first 3 months of pregnancy, only the woman and her physician may decide whether she may have an abortion.
The Supreme Court's historic ruling on Monday upholding the legality of abortion but allowing states to impose restrictions.
The court ruled in favor of 2 Texas men who challenged the state law that made homosexual conduct a crime.
It was another historic day at the Supreme Court. Marriage equality is now the law of the land.
But now those rights are also in danger here. They're at risk. Justice Clarence Thomas is saying we should reconsider the court having rights to those rulings you just heard in those newscasts: contraception, same-sex marriage, and even same-sex intercourse. Here's another quote. "Until the mid-20th century, there was no support in American law for a constitutional right to contraceptives."
And look, this ruling is bad enough on its own, but it also sets a new precedent that can make things even worse. Because if the rights to privacy that Roe is based on doesn't actually exist, then all sorts of things could become illegal. Contraception, gay marriage, sex before marriage, adultery, masturbation. I mean, everyone assumed that these things were here to stay. Yeah, but give this court some time and you just wake up and find yourself back in the 1960s. Except you wouldn't have hitchhiking, which was the best part of the 1960s.
That's where the speaker was. I wasn't sure where the speaker was, so I appreciate that. So, yeah, so that was the decision because, and you know, abortion was not deeply rooted. Now, our historians could probably clarify that there was a history of abortion in our society before quickening. I mean, we can have this conversation, but there was a history of that. But you know, Clarence Thomas, shockingly, is not a history major, so he was not aware of that. But he's writing this opinion as if he was a history major, and he's not. So again, a very shocking decision. So why did I talk about the other ones, the other issues? Oops. I lose mine. Let's see. Because the right to privacy doesn't just affect abortion. So, Texas officials, immediately after the ruling, announced plans to criminalize sodomy, gay sex, and ban same-sex marriage. Because the Supreme Court made it clear Clarence Thomas made it very clear in his decision, well, there's different ways to write. There's a concurring opinion. You have the majority opinion, concurring opinion. And he made it very clear in his concurring opinion that clearly that these are not settled issues. That the right to have gay sex, the right to have gay marriage, these are all up in the air, up for grabs. So what happened since Dobbs? Remember, and this is kind of confusing to a lot of people. It makes no sense to me. I don't know why. To me, you know, Marvin as our psych person, I don't know, perhaps Professor Tobias could explain if we have any questions. But they measure pregnancy from the first day, first day of your last period? Yeah, for the first day of your last period. So if you had a period and then, you know, so you're 6 weeks pregnant, it means since you're not actually 6 weeks pregnant in the sense that the fetus is not actually 6 weeks old, it's more like 4 weeks old, but whatever, that's how they measure periods. So that's what a week means. So if you had your last period, you know, last month, 6 weeks later is when you're how pregnant you are. So this is kind of a busy chart, but you can kind of see where basically the north is a little bit more, I mean, especially the west, you can have abortions up to 20, 26 weeks, A few states have no restrictions based on gestational duration. Now, again, most of those states that have longer abortions also have provisions for life and health of the mother. And that's really a big deal because many states don't even have health of the mother as a so since Roe v. Wade was overturned, Roe v. Wade guaranteed the right of women to have an abortion if their life or health were threatened. In other words, they might become infertile if they didn't have an abortion. Many states, especially the states with near bans or short-term bans, did not give that exception. There's no health exception. Missouri is one. There is no health exception in Missouri. So these are the states with the most, just to kind of simplify it, with the strictest bans on either complete bans or 6-week bans. I don't know if you follow the news. Just last month, we had 2 women die in Georgia. One of them was Amber Thurman. She actually, most of the time, the abortion pills are very effective, but sometimes there is, the tissue doesn't completely clear out of the uterus, and that tissue can go bad. And so what you basically need, what's called the DNC, which kind of clears out the uterus, and it can be perceived as an abortion. It isn't really, but it can be seen as an abortion, DNC. But the problem is, if it's seen as an abortion, and in states like Missouri and Georgia, you have to, it's not the health of the mother, the life of the mother has to be threatened before you can actually give an abortion. And so when she was told by her doctors, yes, your fetus is not viable, it's not going to happen, and yes, you're going to need an abortion because you're going to die if you don't have an abortion, but you're not going to die yet. And I don't want to go to prison because in many states like Missouri, if a prosecutor thinks you gave an abortion you shouldn't have, and the health of the mother at risk, you can actually spend up to 15 years in prison. So the doctor said, okay, we're going to have to wait. Go home, go to your car. I forgot what they said in Georgia. Just go home and wait. And then when you get really sick, when you're close to death, then come back in and we'll give you an abortion. We'll give you a DNC. Okay, but you have to wait till you're close to death. Well, that's exactly what she did. But what's the problem? She waited a little too long. Yeah. Again, that's always the trick. You have to wait till just before you die, then you can have an abortion. Because otherwise the doctor goes to prison. And so that's what happened to her. Same thing happened to another woman. She actually didn't even go in. She was terrified of going in, and so she ended up dying at home as well. So Missouri law is pretty clear. It says that it is essentially illegal to have an abortion, except in very certain life-threatening circumstances. Even in cases of rape or incest. So someone mentioned rape or incest. In some cases, in some states, you can have an abortion for rape or incest. But I think it was it Indiana or Ohio, where that 10-year-old girl was raped by her mother's boyfriend? It was Ohio. And it was Ohio last year, and Ohio had a ban and there was no exception for rape or incest. And so she had to travel, the 10-year-old who got pregnant from her mother's boyfriend raping her. She had to go to, luckily Indiana did not had a rape exception, and so she was able to get an abortion in Indiana. But Missouri doesn't have a rape exception either. So, I mean, Missouri, now luckily here in St. Charles, we're pretty close to Illinois. But if you're in the heart of Texas, you can't just drive an hour and get an abortion. In Missouri, here in St. Charles, it's a relatively quick drive, but in other places it's not. So here's a quote from someone in Kansas City, a doctor in Kansas City. When we have something that looks like it's skirting the line and there's a flicker of a heartbeat, but someone is desperately ill, they're not going to put the hospital's licensure on the line. They're going to say, good thing you live next to Kansas. so they can take her over to Kansas and have the abortion there. Because again, the hospital doesn't want to lose their license. A doctor doesn't want to go to prison. And so this is what happens there. So 15 years in prison. If a prosecutor thinks you committed a crime. Okay. The doctor is sure. So it's not the doctor is sure you're going to have an abortion. You need an abortion. You're going to die otherwise, but you got to get into what they'll often do. It happens all the time. They'll often told to go wait in your car, and then when you get really close to death, come back in. And that's kind of what happened here. So, on November 5th, first Tuesday, is it the 5th? Okay, I should know the date by now. Whatever the first Tuesday after a Monday in November is, Election Day, you're going to have a chance to vote on abortion in Missouri. And this is from the Secretary of State, Missouri Secretary of State. Again, the same people that give you the voting stuff. So again, you can actually find this on their website. This is the fair ballot language. This is how he interprets. This is how in a fairly nonpartisan way, what this actually would do. So it's a constitutional right to make decisions about reproductive health care, including abortion and contraceptives. Allows abortion to be restricted or banned after fetal viability, except to protect the health and life of the woman. So what does that essentially do? Right, well, it says, it reinstates the Roe protections, the Roe v. Wade. Basically it says, this is what Roe v. Wade was all about. Yeah, right to abortion, again, I think this should work, and also, up to fetal viability, which is 25-ish weeks, and then except, but even after that, if there's a life or health exception. So it adds a health exception as well, so that you don't have to actually wait until someone's about to die before they have even a late-term abortion. So you can restrict abortions after, but not if there's a health exception. So the blue is interesting too. I don't know, anyone know why you would do this? To not discriminate in government programs, funding, and other activities against persons providing or obtaining reproductive health care. Why would they say that? Yes? Okay, there's a protection about individuals as well. Good, about being feared. What else has the Missouri legislature done that is, in terms of discriminatory, at least from some groups, it's perceived as discriminatory? Healthcare workers, but also in terms of funding, though. In terms of funding, what group is they're trying to just not fund? Planned Parenthood, right. So this would say you could not deny. So Planned Parenthood does a lot of things. They provide abortions too, but Missouri doesn't, so this is not requiring you to pay for abortions, but Planned Parenthood does a ton of other things besides abortions. And they often provide other, even pregnancy issues, but also like pap smears and all the other stuff, healthcare. And Missouri has tried, a lot of times, a lot of Republicans especially, are very unhappy with Planned Parenthood, and so they try to write laws into law saying Planned Parenthood cannot get any funding, even for contraceptive funding. So for example, if you're on Medicaid, you get health care, the government providing your health care, but you can't go to you can go to another doctor, but you can't go to Planned Parenthood. Well, this would actually guarantee that you can't discriminate against Planned Parenthood in terms of funding. So, and reproductive health care is, there is a push. I don't know, Professor Tobias is probably more knowledgeable about, as a psychology person, about the human biology than I am, but there is a push about certain kinds of treatments, IVF, in vitro, and even certain kinds of contraception, such as IUDs and the morning after pill. What do you think? Why do you think people oppose to IVF? What's going on with IVF, in vitro fertilization? Okay, go ahead, back.
Because they don't want gay couples to have kids.
Okay, that's not what I was thinking of, but it's possible. All right, they would. She was saying it's possibly it's an issue with gay couples having kids. It's possible. I think it's my sense. It's not the biggest reason, but it's possible. I'm sure there are some that feel that way. Yes.
It's more about the idea that a child is a child at conception, and because IVF leaves a lot of embryos left over that aren't used, they see it as bad.
Right. So if you're doing in vitro fertilization, you fertilize a fair number. I don't know. Anyone know how many embryos they actually fertilize? But it's quite a few embryos they fertilize. And then they inject those. They put those in. Not my specialty. But they use some embryos, but they don't use all of them typically. And so therefore you have some embryos that are left over, and they're often destroyed. Well, if you believe that life begins at conception, these embryos are human beings, and that's an issue there. Alabama Supreme Court ruled, was it this year or last year? Not that long ago. That embryos were human beings, and therefore you could not use them, you could not destroy them. And so there was a pause in IVF treatment in Alabama, and I think the legislature came in and reversed that. But that's where we're talking about. So again, if it's life begins at conception, that's where we're going here. And the same thing with IUDs and morning after pills. Yes.
Sorry, I just have a question because I know my aunt has her eggs in storage. She didn't use them. Isn't it I think she had them in Texas, and I think there was something that went on there that they said that was illegal because she had to move them somewhere else.
So were they fertilized eggs? Were they embryo? Or were they just?
I don't think they were fertilized because I think she.
Yeah.
I don't think they were fertilized because she did she didn't use any of them, but she's keeping them in case anyone else in the family can't have kids. She was going to do a donation thing, but I know she had to move them for some reason law that was.
I wasn't aware of Texas. Texas may have been considering some. Maybe she's worried about Texas and is thinking about moving them. I'm not aware of Texas having a law on that, but there's always talk. I mean, and Texas is a red state, a Republican state, so it's possible that would happen. My guess is they probably were fertilized eggs, fertilized embryos, but just because otherwise I don't think anyone cares if it's just eggs, but fertilized embryos. But again, it's the idea that life begins at conception, and that's a very Catholic. My brother is devout Catholic, and that's what he believes. He believes it's a human being. Once it's conceived, it's a human being. So that's his perspective. And the same thing with the morning after pill, because it often, my understanding is it often sometimes it prevents conception, but also often prevents implantation, just like an IUD can do both. And so therefore, if it's already conceived, then you can actually, therefore you're still killing a 6-hour-old baby, but still it's a human being at 6 hours old. Yes. Okay, well, her point is it's a violation of separation of church and state if you allow one person's religious beliefs to be imposed on another. That is a perfectly valid. I mean, I would agree with you on that. Obviously they would say no, it's a human being. So we get caught up in that, but I would not disagree with you. But just FYI, I always tell my students, I forgot to tell you guys, I'm a liberal. My point of view, you could disagree with me. Disagreement's fun. Don't agree with me. My best students always. I had a student last year who disagreed. We had the best conversations in class, and I wrote him a letter, and he got the presidential scholarship at UMSL in part because of a letter I wrote for him. And he always disagreed with me, but it was such a fun time in class. It was so interesting. So please feel free to disagree, but I just want to let you know where I'm coming from. So I do have a bias here. We all have a perspective, and that's my perspective. So I agree with that perspective, but again, I have a bias there. I usually tell that at the beginning of the spiel, but I forgot to do that this time. So you know, again, there was a Oklahoma bill on limiting contraceptives, and there were even some Republicans that were worried it could actually ban IUDs. So there's the Alabama bill. So who supports the amendment? Various different groups. The reason why the Democratic Party is in blue is because I went to Ballotpedia, and if there's a link to the link, that's a hyperlink. So that's why I went to Ballotpedia to figure out who the supporters were, and this is who they said the supporters were. Generally speaking, medical professionals support this. They don't want to get arrested. Okay. I mean, I'm sure there are a few doctors and nurses who oppose this, but I think if you actually work in the field, if you're actually an OBGYN, I can't imagine you opposing this, because you could get arrested for this. And here's, you know, Missourians for Constitutional Freedom is the main group behind it. Here's the various various groups that have funded it. ACLU. Opponents, oops. This is where Josh Hawley's linked, not because he's extra special, it's because on the website they had a link to his website, so that's why it's different color. So that you can see who the groups are. Ballotpedia is actually a really great website. Ballotpedia, I don't know if you can see that really well down there, but if you want to find out about a ballot issue, it's really helpful because it tells you, who supports it. There's often links to their websites, what they actually stand for, so it's kind of fun. So there's other issues on the ballot too in Missouri. So Ballotpedia is a really kind of a fun place to go for doing your own research. But it's actually whenever I hear a student say, I'm going to do my own research, I cringe a little bit, because it's like, please don't go to YouTube and do your own research on YouTube, because there are some good sources on YouTube, but there's much better sources out there. So I'm always nervous about that. But if you're going to do your own research, Ballotpedia is a good place to go. And I thought I saw a hand. No. So for those who couldn't hear, she was saying it doesn't make sense that if you're pro-life, why you would support this if women could die from it. You're arguing that it's about controlling women. Okay, so it is interesting that we've known this issue and they haven't tweaked the law. That to me, that I'm not sure why you couldn't add a health exception without having to go through that. So, but yeah, yes.
This is actually less of a question, more of a comment that I was thinking about. So in the state of Missouri, actually a lot of states and hospitals, if you reach a certain age and basically you are considered brain dead, their doctors cannot determine function in your brain. More often than not, family members will debate amongst themselves or talk to the doctor, and then at some point they may elect to unhook the machines that are literally keeping you alive. And it's kind of occurred to me when a period like that that's still life. That's actually, in most cases, an adult that is alive with the machine, keeping them alive. And we consider life sacred according to law, or a pro-life state according to law. But why is it okay to end a life when they're that old, and yet not preserve life of a mother? Or, in some cases, why is it okay to end an adult life and not a child that is going to have possibly no future, no medical future whatsoever? Maybe they're going to wind up with this brain dead as an adult. Maybe they won't have vital organ function the same as this adult is with all these machines. I'm not really going by opinion one way or another. It just occurred to me that that's how our society is currently operating.
Yeah, so I'm going to just so I can reiterate, please let me know if I'm saying it wrong, because I'm trying to reiterate. So he's arguing that in Missouri and a lot of other states, you could, if someone is near death, you can withdraw support and not extend a life. So if, and why is that okay, but not treat this woman who's needs this treatment and do that, I think. As a matter of fact, my mom just died last month, actually, and she was a DNR, do not resuscitate, and we just, the doctor said, do you want us to do, she was 92, so, had a long life, but do you want to do life-saving treatments? And I said, no, she's a DNR. And so I was with her, and she just died in the hospital room. We didn't hook her up to any fancy equipment. She just passed away in the hospital. And it was just, we didn't know nothing extreme there. So, but I was, so it's interesting that in that case, she was obviously, she had a stroke and was not doing well, and so it made sense to let her die, and not keep her alive with and we could have. There's modern technology, you can keep someone alive for a long time even if they're brain dead, and you can do a lot of things. So, is that kind of your point? I'm not sure if I got it right.
So I guess moreover, what I was thinking was, what is actually determined as life? Because I was actually sitting back there reading the law. Life is determined at conception. Now, obviously, that's not the issue. Something we would sing a life for. That is not the question right there. Conception. So, what is determined as life at that point? Most doctors will come to you and say, "Hey, they're brain dead. They're not really alive." That's what they'll say. You have had a similar experience where I've had to machine loved ones, and I've had to make that call.
But they let you make it. They let you make the call. And the doctor should be able to get down with him.
And I think that's what he's saying. Yeah.
What truly is determined as life under Missouri law? They don't really clarify that except by saying conception. There's no specific language saying if your heart, lungs are working, if your brain is able to do this, you're alive.
Yeah. The definition of life, it's a philosophical question about what is life and what, it's a great question. One way beyond my pay grade here as a simple faculty member at 2G Poli Sci at St. Charles Community College. Yes, and then Grace. Yeah. And in the case of my mom, I was the one who made the call. The doctor called me at 6 o'clock in the morning and said, "Hey, she's in the ER." And yeah, and I was able to make that call and say no life supporting measures, no, she's a DNR. But she made the call actually. She signed a living will that says no, she's a DNR. So I just reinformed the doctor in the hospital room in the ER. That's what's going on. And you're saying, why can't you do that? Can't a loved one make that decision? The parents make that decision. I think that's what you're kind of saying as well. Yeah. So, okay, that's a fair point. I thought someone, yeah, Grace.
I was just saying, historically speaking, this question has gotten a lot more complicated, like when you just let it fit in, because of science giving us new interpretations of what's alive and what's not. So like the question of taking somebody off life support and brain activity and brain functioning, like there's like lower brain function which does the basic breathing and things like that, and there's higher brain function which is like what affects our ability to be us, like who we are, like our personality, that sort of thing. So I think that's where the question comes from. But also historically speaking, life was presumed by like religious people as the quickening, which is when you feel the baby move for the first time, which often doesn't happen until the second or third trimester.
Yeah, this is historically, she's pointing out the historical interpretations, and that in my understanding of the Catholic Church even, it was quickening, which is, we were what, month 5 or 6?
Yeah.
Something like that is when when you start feeling the kick, that's when the perception of the church was, that's when it's alive. Jews, I know, oh shoot, I think a different sects, it's later on. Muslims, it's also later on. So different religious beliefs have different beliefs on when it's a human being.
And the conception thing is a more modern take.
Yeah, and so yeah. So her point is that conception is much more modern. It's a recent interpretation of when life begins. Historically, it's been much, abortion was much more accepted historically, up until quickening, which is again, month 5 or 6, throughout history. So it's, again, that's where Clarence Thomas just didn't know what he was talking about. But unfortunately, or if you agree with him, fortunately, if you agree with him, unfortunately for me, I disagree with him, it doesn't matter that he doesn't know what he's talking about in terms of history, because he gets to write, he's one of the 9 members of the Supreme Court, he gets to write the law, he gets to write the Supreme Court interpretation, so that's why it's there. So here are the donors for the people opposing the amendment. So you get, again, it's a great website. So 10 states are voting this November on whether or not to expand abortion or not. So you can see here, again, I put the little map up here where it's banned pretty much, and you can see that, you know, Missouri, Florida, where else? I guess Nebraska and South Dakota are voting. If they vote, they could actually, again, make abortion more accessible in those states as well. Florida just had I think it's a 6-week ban. And Donald Trump had a really weird answer. Originally, he opposed Florida's 6-week ban. He came out saying it was a bad idea, but then he was asked, "Are you going to support the constitutional amendment which would allow abortion?" I forgot what the Florida law, the constitutional amendment does. But would you expand it? He said no. So again, its values are tricky. Politics, I always kind of go back to this theme. Politics is who gets what, when, and how. Yesterday, my theme was the how. The rules affect the outcome. Hey, it's about who gets what. What do you want? What do you want government to do? What don't you want government to do? How much freedom do you want? How much order do you want? So there's no right answer in a lot of this. I mean, of course, I'm always right? So what I think is right. But, you know, realistically, there's no right answer. So what do you want? What does somebody else want? You know, there are people of good faith on both sides. You know, and it is frustrating. Someone mentioned about women dying. Why, you know, to me, one of my frustrations is, why don't people change the law to make it less likely for women to die? To me, I just don't. It could go back to our conversation from Monday with Professor Tobias and Professor Moser, where we talked about, you know, maybe this is a perception. People just don't realize. You know, we talked about, you know, what was going on, how African Americans are treated by cops, and that perception, it was people weren't aware of that. So maybe the reason why these red states aren't on their own, Republicans aren't on their own trying to give women some more rights, because they just don't understand that this is actually happening. I'm sorry? Yeah, and I just don't. To me, it's like there's a real easy common ground that, to me, it makes, you know, why I understand even, you know, but why would you ban a woman who clearly wanted to have a kid, found out that there's the kid's not going to survive, that she doesn't. I mean, there was years ago, a Catholic woman testified on Capitol Hill, and she said, you know, there was a ban before Congress passed a partial birth abortion ban, and she said she had one. And the reason why she had one is because she's Catholic and she wanted more kids. And the doctor said, this is how your kid's not going to survive. If you want to have more kids, we need to have an abortion now and get it so you can actually clear your uterus and actually have more kids later. And so that's kind of, I just don't, to me, I don't understand why the disconnect there. Because I can see in general, you know, people like my brother, very devout Catholics, you know, abortion in general is wrong, but I don't understand the last part. Yes?
I do feel like some people believe that people are using abortion as birth control, which for me is not true because birth control is now very easy to access. Most abortions, if they happen, is probably because of an issue.
A failure of birth control.
Or, failure of birth control, or an underserved community, which, you know, you can't support another child. You know, it's not, that's why we need Planned Parenthood, so we can get the birth control out to communities so they don't have to make that horrible decision.
Yeah, so she's arguing that there's a perception out there among some people that people use birth control so people use abortion as birth control. It's a very expensive form of birth control. If that's what you're doing, it's not cheap. So it's just, I highly doubt that's actually happening. I mean, you know, there's always, I'm sure there is, you can always have a case of some, you know, one or two people doing something strange. But for the most part, it's probably right. It's either, you know, mistiming of pregnancy or a failure.
I've heard people say that to me.
Yeah.
You know, they don't want to have a baby, so they're just going to have an abortion. I'm like, well, no, you're taking away their access to birth control. You know, people go to clinics and they get birth control. What did Planned Parenthood do mostly?
Yeah.
Give out birth control.
And then abstinence-only education, sex education
Yeah.
in schools.
Yeah, that's valid as well. Abstinence-only education is, you know, not letting people know how to do, you know, where you can get birth control. That's kind of their argument is that we should have more birth control. They're kind of, you know, rather than, you know, and that's always been, that was like Bill Clinton's favorite line when he was president. It's like, you know, we need to make sure everyone can get access to birth control. You know, I think what was his famous quote, should be safe, legal, and rare. That was his perception, at least, from way back in the very 90s point of view. But that was his argument. We need to make sure we can get birth control. Yes?
I noticed that when we showed the two women in Georgia who died because they weren't able to get those abortions that would have protected their health, I noticed that they both already had kids, like in the picture. Like there were children in the picture. So like they probably didn't want to have that kid, but they just couldn't due to their own health.
Well, the first woman, the woman on the beach, that I showed you a picture on the beach, she actually, I can't remember, I think she just broke up with her boyfriend or broke up with her husband, or I can't remember what happened, but for some reason the dad was no longer in the picture and she didn't feel she could raise another child on her own. Because she had one child and she's like, I can't do another baby, I can't do this. Right. So she was like, I can't do two kids, I mean, on my own. And so I forgot it, I don't remember the exact story, I don't remember the exact story of what happened to her, but that was why she was doing it. And it was just a, you know, she found out the day after 6 weeks. So 6 weeks in a day, she found out. And then she's a day late. And then, you know, Georgia had a 6-week law, so she couldn't get to Georgia. Then she tried to go to a next door state, but I forgot where she tried to get an abortion. But traffic was bad, and so she was 3 hours late for the surgical abortion. And then they said, well, we've already scheduled, you know, too late, you got so many abortions, we can't squeeze you in. So she didn't get that, but they gave her the pill. And the pill, it works most of the time, but sometimes there are complications, and you need to go to the hospital sometimes and have a D&C to clear out the remains of the again, it was it wasn't a viable fetus. That's what's so shocking about that. It was not like it was a viable fetus. It was it was just tissue there that was dead, but they wouldn't even do that because they were terrified. The doctors were terrified of going to prison, and so they said, we're not going to do this until you're really close to death. Yes? Oh, sure. Yeah. I'm not sure. I'm trying to restate the questions. Please let me know if I'm not restating them correctly.
Sorry.
So, you know, anyone else have any comments or questions?
I was just going to say, Paul, I'm glad I have the microphone. I think this gets to like the issue of like why people think this is about women's rights. Because it does seem like the women are being devalued in this equation. Like their life is not worth as much as the fetus. in this case. Like, there's no care for the women in that. And I think that we're never going to have an honest conversation about this until we acknowledge how brutal pregnancy is, and like having the choice not to do that. Like, you know, it could have killed that little 10-year-old girl. Like, women die from being pregnant or in childbirth. Like, maternal deaths are on the rise. And a few years ago, I think it was the UN that said we were a dangerous location for women. Like, women's rights had regressed so much that it was now considered a dangerous place for women to be. Like, there's so many aspects to pregnancy. It's not easy. I had 2 pregnancies and I almost died with both of them. And on my last pregnancy, my mom begged me to have my tubes tied to be sterilized so that she wouldn't have to worry about me dying again, because I almost died with both. I had twin boys for my first pregnancy, and then my daughter Ramona, I got a common virus, and then it became post-infectious encephalomyelitis, and attacked my spine and my brain, and I lost the ability to walk and talk. And I had to move in with my parents at 28 weeks pregnant. I desperately wanted that baby. Like, I desperately wanted to be a mom. I wanted more kids. But I remember being in the hospital for the first time at Mercy, realizing that if, like, I had to have the conversation with my mom, like, if I have to choose between my life and this baby's, like, I pick me, because I have 2 boys that I want to go home with. And then she had to sit and listen to that as a mother. And then afterwards, like, I realized I wouldn't have even been able to get access to an abortion because I was in a Catholic hospital. And they might not have determined whether that was enough to save my life. This was pre all of this stuff. I was in 2018, 2017. In addition to that, I also, like women, regularly get postpartum depression and anxiety, and that can be deadly. And it's underdiagnosed, it's under-resourced. Like, taking care of women, like, needs to be a priority in all aspects of their health care. And this is a complicated thing that, you know, women and medical professionals are making decisions together, but our society just does not value women's lives the way that it should.
And maternal mortality, I don't have this.
And it's higher for women of color.
Yeah, maternal mortality is really high in America. It's really high.
Let me give you the microphone.
Yeah, so, hold on, I'm just trying to, okay, great, it works. In addition to my comment earlier about how, about how women, like, the women who died from abortions, already had kids and wanted more kids, a lot of their arguments, the people who are arguing against it, their arguments like, oh, well, why don't you just give the kid up for adoption? But, like, I don't see any of them adopting any kids. Like, I just don't think, I just think they expect other people to do the work that, that they aren't willing to do. Yeah.
I was going to say also, it's traumatic to give up your child for adoption.
Oh, yeah.
You love that child when it's growing in you. Yeah, foster care is overloaded.
Yeah, those are great points.
I'm so scared to talk to this. Okay, it's working?
Yes, fantastic.
It's also not being able to have abortions puts a lot of people in dangerous relationships and situations in so much more danger, because ultimately if you're impregnated by someone who hurts you and you can't get away from that person, you have to carry their child to term, you are then connected to that person through the legal system, because then you have to decide, like, courts have to decide what's going to happen with the child. Are you going to give it up? Do you need to pay child support? That person who already has plans to hurt you now has more power to keep hurting you for the rest of your life because you were tied by that child. So it is very much about power and control. And not having abortion gives more power to people who will hurt others.
We have time for maybe one more quick comment or question. And
Right.
then-
Yeah. If anyone else wants to speak, Sarah, spoke a few times.
Does anybody else?
Anybody else want to? Okay, go for it.
Okay, so I went to Francis Howell High School and I graduated in the year 2022. And I actually attended a walkout for Roe v. Wade. This was back in May of 22. Did anybody else go to Francis Howell? Was anybody else at that protest? Okay, nobody? That's all right. But I was there and everybody was wearing red. I don't know why they chose red, but they chose red to like signify. And the school itself was liberal. They tried to be all like, oh, we accept diversity, but there's people getting bullied in these schools. I mean, that's a whole other issue. But I went to that protest and there were a bunch of testimonies from the people organizing it. There were even some people there who, these people, they're like 16, 17, 18 years old. And there was even one person who was a victim of rape and who fortunately was able to get an abortion, but, they said that, if this law, if it's overturned, unfortunately it was, they wouldn't be able to do that anymore. So, these are people, these people that are having to, they're your friends, they're your classmates, they're your coworkers, There's a lot of people suffering from this.
Well, anyway, so yeah, that's true. This affects a lot of people. Basically every woman in here who's under childbearing age, it could very well have an impact on you. Again, elections in a little less than, about 6 weeks or so, a little less than 6 weeks. So if whatever your point of view, whatever your perspective, you have a chance now to vote for it or vote against it, as the case may be. So, okay, well, thank you so much. We'll, one more session in 20 minutes or so. So if you can make it, great. Otherwise, have a lovely day. Have a lovely weekend.